There are men who are never defeated by others. They do it to themselves. Not through reckless actions, but through the quiet phrases they repeat in silence. I've always been like this. It's not my fault. Men can't be weak. These words may sound strong, but in truth, they erode the mind little by little. No one notices, until everything in their life begins to fall apart slowly, silently, and beyond repair. We often think words are fleeting, but for a man, what he says about himself is what he becomes. Every phrase is a choice. Either it keeps us awake or lulls us into stagnation. Stoic philosophy does not teach us to speak much, but to speak with awareness. Because everything begins with perception, we cannot change our lives if we remain unconscious of how we think and how we speak. And if there are words silently wounding you without your knowing, perhaps it's time to look at them more clearly. Start with the first one. 1. I've always been this way. The trap of a fixed identity. One of the most seemingly harmless phrases, but one that silently destroys a man's inner growth is, I've always been this way. It's often spoken when one feels challenged, questioned, or simply doesn't want to change something about the way they live, think, or react. It sounds like self-protection, but in truth, it's how they close the door on their own potential. I once met a man named Sam in his 60s, a seasoned watch repairman who lived in a small town and drank the same cup of coffee at the same hour every morning for 30 years. When asked why he never tried anything else, he just smiled. I've always been this way. At first, it seemed admirable, a man of principle, steady, unmoved by trends. But a deeper look at how he handled relationships, especially with his wife and children, revealed something troubling. Sam never apologized, never listened to feedback, never adjusted the way he spoke, even when it hurt others. He believed that being real meant never hiding anything, no matter how abrasive it was. And when his wife said she felt lonely, he replied, "You married me. You knew what I was like." That phrase sounded like a declaration of identity, but in truth, it was a wall. The issue is not with habits. No one blames you for liking black coffee every morning or playing the same song each night. The issue is when you use "that's just how I am" to avoid facing what you know needs to change. You know you're quick to anger, but instead of learning to manage it, you say, "I was born hot-headed." You know you're distant, but you wear it as a badge. "I'm just not a people person." Each phrase becomes a brick in a wall you build around your own mind and then lock yourself inside it. Stoic philosophy never accepts a fixed identity. Seneca once wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." It reads like a command, not because life demands change, but because you owe it to yourself to keep growing. A man doesn't live to protect his image. He lives to refine it daily. Clinging to "I've always been this way" is like holding on to a rusted tool and refusing to reshape it just because it served you once in your youth. Identity is not something to preserve. It is something to forge. And forging doesn't happen when life is easy. It happens when you are confronted, challenged, asked to look inward and ask, "What in me needs to change?" But the man who says, "I've always been this way," rarely asks that. He doesn't listen, not because he's too strong to hear it, but because he's too afraid to face the possibility that he might be wrong. That fear is disguised behind words like, "I'm just being honest," "I have principles," or "I'm not fake." But ask yourself, have you ever stopped learning from others because you believed your experience was enough? Have you rejected advice not because it was wrong, but because you refused to admit you needed correction? Have you maintained the same behavior in a relationship, even knowing that without change, the other person would walk away? If the answer is yes, then perhaps you've been living under an old name for too long, and that name that always been this way self is no longer serving you. It's limiting you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Don't waste time being proud of yourself as if you were already complete. Instead, focus on becoming worthy. And to be worthy, you must change. Not because someone asks you to, but because you understand. Yesterday's self cannot be the standard for tomorrow." In a world that's constantly moving, the one who refuses to change is not staying true to himself. He's drifting away from reality. He's not standing still. He's falling behind, step by step, year by year, opportunity after opportunity slipping away. And eventually, the people who once loved him will grow tired, then weary, and quietly leave. Not out of resentment, but because they realize he no longer wants to grow. A Stoic man does not see himself as a statue fixed and flawless. He sees himself as a work in progress, always something to sharpen, to smooth, to rebuild. He never says, "I've always been this way," because he knows the moment he utters it is the moment he stops becoming better. And if you've ever said that phrase, "Stop now," ask yourself, am I using this as an excuse not to evolve? If the answer is yes, remember every change begins with awareness. And every identity can be rebuilt as long as you have the courage to stop repeating yourself. Because you are not a closed version of yourself. You are a blade, and every day is a chance to sharpen. 2. I deserve better. When expectation replaces discipline, I deserve better. It sounds like a declaration of self-respect. A phrase often repeated during moments of disappointment after a broken relationship, an unfulfilling job, or a life that feels stuck. It seems like the first step toward change, but sadly, most of the time, it isn't the beginning of anything. It's the end of any real effort. That phrase, when not followed by concrete action, is nothing more than an empty name tag. It announces to the world that you have value, but offers no proof why. Because between knowing you deserve better and becoming someone who deserves better lies a vast gap. And most men don't cross that gap, not because they lack ability, but because they lack discipline. I once worked with a man named Julian in his 40s, a software engineer with over 15 years of experience. After a meeting where his manager criticized him heavily, he turned to me and said, "I don't need to hear this. I deserve a better job, a better environment." I asked him, "Maybe, but are you doing anything daily to become better?" Julian fell silent. No learning habit, no skill updates, no response to feedback. Yet he held firmly to the belief that he deserved more. In reality, many people fall into that exact state. They place expectations on others. I deserve recognition. I deserve more love. I should be paid more. I don't deserve to be treated this way. But very few of them ask the reverse. What virtues am I cultivating every day? Who am I becoming when no one is watching? Am I truly working like someone who wants to be better? Or am I simply demanding comfort? Stoic philosophy leaves no room for the illusion of being deserving. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't waste time wondering what a good person is. Be one." In that single short sentence, he dismantles the entire modern system of expectation. We are not promised rewards just for existing. We are not entitled to respect if we don't live in a way that earns it. Fairness in life is not a result of desire, but of behavior, habit, and consistent repetition. A Stoic man understands that virtue comes not from status, not from age, not from praise. It comes from what he does when no one sees, from how he keeps commitments without being pushed, from how he keeps his word to himself without anyone checking. and that, not the feeling of being deserving, is what determines true worth. The danger of saying I deserve better is this. It turns a tool for action into an illusion of entitlement. It makes people wait instead of move. It makes them complain instead of take responsibility. And worse, it leads them to measure their worth not by internal standards, but by what the outside world hasn't given them. I'm not loved enough. I'm not appreciated. I'm not rewarded. I've met many middle-aged men with a lost look in their eyes. They were once young men full of ambition. They used to say, "One day I'll succeed. I'll be respected." But when that one day didn't come as expected, they began to tell themselves, "Maybe I was just unlucky." Then they said, "I deserve better than this." And they repeated that line until it became a lullaby for their stagnation. They no longer moved forward, they just waited and waited and waited. Seneca once warned, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." One of the most dangerous forms of waste is demanding without acting. Every time you say, "I deserve better," pause and ask yourself, am I doing anything each day to deserve it? If not, you're building a castle on sand. It will collapse, and you'll blame the wind instead of asking why you never laid a solid foundation. The Stoic man does not carry a list of what he's owed. He carries a blade, and each day is a chance to sharpen it. He doesn't ask, "What will I get?" He asks, "Who am I becoming?" That is the difference. One man says, "I deserve." The other acts so he never has to. And do you know what's interesting? The men who are truly worthy rarely speak of what they deserve. They're too busy training, contributing, adjusting. They don't wait for rewards. And when the rewards come, they receive them not as gifts, but as the natural consequence of silent effort. The world owes you no recognition, but you owe yourself discipline. If you truly deserve something better, you won't need to say it. Life will reflect it through how others see you, how opportunities find you, and most of all, how you respect yourself. So next time that phrase rises within "I deserve better," answer it with a specific action. Learn something new. Change an old habit. Keep a promise you once ignored. A small act, but a meaningful one. Because value doesn't live in expectation. It is born in discipline. It grows in silence. And it shines when you no longer need to prove anything at all. 3. That's not my job. When responsibility gets trapped in a job description, a man can fulfill every task assigned to him. He shows up on time, finishes work on schedule, avoids major mistakes, causes no disruption, and still, he can be a failing man. Because deep down, he's stopped seeing what needs to be done. He only sees what is his responsibility. I don't do that, it's not my job. That sentence sounds like a clear boundary, a way to protect one's rights, but in truth, it's the sign of a man who has shrunk himself to the minimum scope of responsibility. No initiative left, no active presence, only a life defined by checklists and contracts. I remember a man named Harold, a technician at a mechanical plant. For 25 years, he was never late, never took unexcused leave, never caused an incident. On paper, Harold was the perfect employee, but anyone who worked near him could sense something cold. He helped no one outside his assigned tasks, stayed silent unless called upon, and ignored anything outside his formal duties. When the printer broke in the meeting room, he walked past. When a new colleague struggled with the system, he said nothing. "Not my job," he repeated like a mantra. The issue isn't performance, it's spirit. A man can do everything right and still live as though he means nothing to those around him. Because true responsibility isn't found in a job description. It's found in awareness that your presence can make a difference even when no one asks. Marcus Aurelius once asked himself, "What is your vocation? To be a good person?" A simple answer, yet profound. Not to be the most efficient, not to be the highest paid, but to be the one who sees what needs doing and willingly does it, even when it's not his job. When a man lives by the motto, "I only do my part," it means he's stopped seeing himself as part of a whole. He isolates himself in a role, then turns that role into the limit of his kindness, leadership, and contribution. But the most tragic part is this. When you live that way long enough, others begin to believe you can't do more. They stop coming to you, they learn to work around you, and you slowly become invisible, not because you lack ability, but because you refuse to expand your reach. I once spoke with a man nearing retirement named Vincent. He worked in healthcare, precise and meticulous. But when I asked if he had any regrets, he looked down and said, "I wish I had helped more, listened more. I fulfilled my duties, but I'm not sure I was truly present." That sentence haunted me for months, because it speaks a hard truth for many men. They are present, but not engaged. They do, but they don't make a difference. They live, but leave no trace beyond a job description signed 20 years ago. Stoic philosophy never encourages doing just enough. Epictetus once said, "Don't ask what the world owes you. Ask what you owe the world." That question flips the entire passive mindset. It doesn't wait for instruction. It doesn't need direction. It only requires you to be awake enough to see what is right and brave enough to do it, even when inconvenient. Because the truth is, the most important moments in life never come through formal invitations. They come when you see someone who needs help, a task left undone, a space that if you don't fill it, no one else will, and when you step in, without hesitation, without calculation, that's when you're no longer just doing the job. You become dependable. The Stoic man does not see glory through grand acts. He quietly shoulders the small things, restores order amid chaos, holds fast to integrity where no one is watching. He needs no reward. His presence is already a reward to those around him, because he understands. No action is too small if it is done in the spirit of noble service. And when others see that you are willing to step into what no one wants to own, you earn more than trust, you become a foundation. A man others can lean on, a man whose silence carries strength. A man who doesn't need to be told to do the right thing, his self-respect is command enough. I'm not saying you have to carry everything. I'm saying you must ask yourself, are you shrinking into a box of responsibility to avoid discomfort? Are you refusing something not because it's wrong, but because it asks just a bit more of you? If yes, then you're not protecting a boundary. You're denying your own impact. And the world, though harsh, is fair in this. When you start picking and choosing responsibility, it starts picking and choosing you out of real opportunity. No one places trust in the man who does just enough. They give it to the one who dares to do just a bit more empathy, a bit more initiative, a bit more courage. So next time the phrase, "That's not my job," rises in your mind, pause for a second. Ask yourself, am I protecting myself, or am I refusing to become a better version of me? And if you're brave enough to answer honestly, you might choose a different response, a different action, a different man larger than the role, deeper than the title, and stronger because he needs no reminder to do what is right. 4. Men don't talk about feelings, the most dangerous silence. In old photos of my father, he always stared straight into the lens with a cold gaze and an expressionless face. There was never a photo of him smiling. I grew up with that image as the default definition. A man endures. A man does not cry. A man grits his teeth and keeps moving bloody knees. A cracked heart, no matter. And I carried that definition throughout my youth like an old, familiar armor until the day I lost the only woman who ever truly understood me. She didn't leave because I was careless. She left because I was silent. When she asked, "What are you thinking?" I just shook my head. When she tried to talk about the wounds I hadn't healed, I brushed it off with a half joke. "I'm fine. I'm not that weak." I thought my strength would give her comfort, but in the end, it made her feel alone. Because silence isn't peace, it's a void. And if no one is on the other side to call back, it becomes a grave for everything left unsaid and unhealed. The phrase, "men shouldn't talk about feelings," is not a principle, it's an invisible cage. It's passed down like a toxic heirloom, through pats on the back and warnings. Boys don't cry. Weak men are shameful. But no one asks, what's the cost of this toughness? That cost, if you're quiet enough to notice, shows up in broken marriages, distant fathers, men who drink more than they should and speak less than they need to. We call it restraint, but in truth, it's avoidance. Feelings don't disappear when you fall silent. They just take new shapes, into outbursts of unexplained anger, irritation toward the innocent, tightness in the chest whenever someone asks about the past. And at some point, you won't be able to tell the difference between real pain and the pain that grew from denying it too long. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, never hid his emotions. In Meditations, he wrote about sadness, insecurity, and the fear of loss. But he didn't let those feelings rule him. He observed them, wrote them down, examined them not to escape, but to understand. That is what a Stoic man does. Not deny emotion, but approach it as a conscious observer. He doesn't scream, nor does he pretend he feels nothing. He watches himself, then acts not from emotion, but from reason refined through discipline. I once led a discussion group of men in their 40s, successful, composed, grounded. When I asked, when was the last time they truly spoke of their sadness, the room fell into deep silence. One man finally said, "I don't know. Maybe before my father died." I asked, "Did you talk to anyone about it?" He shook his head. I saw his lips tighten, not because he felt nothing, but because it had been so long since anyone taught him how to name what he felt. And that's the terrifying part. When a man loses the language to articulate his inner world, he also loses his ability to connect with those he loves. He doesn't know how to say he's afraid, hurt, or in need of being heard. So instead, he chooses the familiar path, retreating into silence and pretending everything is fine. But that silence comes at a cost. It forces those around you to guess, to make up stories, to carry the weight of a soul that never speaks its truth. And eventually, they grow tired. Not because you're a bad person, but because you're no longer someone they can walk beside. Stoicism doesn't teach us to be emotionless. It teaches us to control our actions, not to run from reality. A mature man isn't one without tears. He's the one who can let them fall in a safe space, in awareness, and then move forward, not overwhelmed. He doesn't need to express everything to the world, but he needs the courage not to lie to himself. Seneca once wrote, "An unexamined mind is a dark room." Meaning, if you don't have the courage to shine light on your own inner world, you'll forever live in the shadow of unnamed emotions, and the longer you run, the more control they take from within, quietly, relentlessly. The world doesn't need you to become weak to be accepted, but it needs your honesty. especially with those who trust you, live beside you, and want to connect beyond the surface. Your wife needs to know what you're thinking, not to control you, but to understand you. Your child needs to see you talk about fear, so they'll know it's okay to be scared too. Your closest friend needs to hear what's hurting you, so he knows you're still human, not just a well-mannered, well-controlled, hollow version of yourself. So if you've ever said, "I'm not the type to talk about emotions," maybe now is the time to ask a different question. Not, "Should I share everything?" but, "Do I have the courage to be honest with myself?" Because only when you can accurately name a feeling, fear, grief, abandonment, can you begin to master it. But if you quietly live with it, deny it, avoid it, it will master you in ways you won't notice until it's too late. The Stoic man doesn't break silence through emotional explosions. He breaks it with precision. He speaks little but truthfully. He doesn't overshare, but he is honest. He doesn't drown in feelings, but he doesn't deny they exist. And that is real strength. Not numbness, but understanding and stillness. Men don't need to say much about their feelings, but they must stop living as if they have none. Because the truth is, you do. And if you don't learn to master them, one day they'll become your unseen master, quiet, but never asleep. 5. It is what it is. When surrender puts on the mask of acceptance, there is a kind of fatigue no one sees. It doesn't come from work, nor from people, but from within you. A weariness that makes you stop reacting, stop trying, and instead settle for a seemingly harmless phrase, "It is what it is." At first, it sounds like maturity, a sign of someone who knows how to let go, who accepts what cannot be changed. But if you listen more closely, you'll hear it wasn't spoken from peace, but from a quiet paralysis. It is not acceptance, but resignation dressed up in philosophical language. I once knew a man named Eli. He was responsible, never complained, never blamed anyone. When his job was cut, he just nodded. When his relationship went cold, he said nothing. When his health declined from long-term stress, he simply smiled and said, "It is what it is." I used to think he was strong, but over time, I noticed the emptiness in his gaze. He no longer responded to the world. No more resistance, no more dreams. His calm was in truth a withdrawal. That withdrawal is dangerous because it tricks you into thinking you're in control when in fact you've lost your edge. It makes you believe you're practicing letting go, but in reality, you're letting go of your will to fight. You can no longer tell where healthy acceptance ends and passive surrender begins. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be clear about what is within your control and what is not." But never once did he say, "Stop trying." On the contrary, every page of Meditations is a reminder. Act with intention, live deliberately, remain steadfast in what is right, even if the outcome is uncertain. Stoicism does not call for passive silence. It calls for awakened strength, so that even when the world resists you, you maintain the posture of an active human being. The phrase, "It is what it is," might be the last thing you say before giving up on a relationship, before letting go of a dream, before settling into a life that no longer excites you. And the saddest part is, you don't realize that surrender didn't happen by choice, it happened by default. Surrender, disguised as acceptance, slowly pulls you away from what once made you feel alive. You stop trying at work because no one appreciates it anyway. You stop communicating in love because nothing will change. You stop speaking your mind because they won't listen. But when you stay silent long enough, life will eventually stop responding to you too. Epictetus once said, "It's not events that disturb us, but how we respond to them." But if you stop responding, If you stop acting, then you're no longer living with a Stoic spirit, you're merely existing beneath the shell of so-called acceptance, which is in truth just passivity. I once heard an older man reflect after retiring. "My life has been fine. Nothing special, but, well, it is what it is." I asked, "Do you feel fulfilled?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Not really, but it's too late to change now." There was no fire in his eyes. And what saddened me wasn't what he didn't achieve, but that he no longer believed change was even possible. You can live 40 years with resilience, but just a few years of resignation can take away your ability to see another path. Because surrender never arrives loudly. It comes in sighs, in the times you say, "Whatever." In nights when you stare into nothing and think, "What's the point in trying?" Each time that happens, you're not just giving up, you're dismantling parts of yourself. The Stoic man understands there are things beyond his control. Weather, death, other people's opinions. But he never gives up what is within his power, his thoughts, his attitude, and his choice to act. He doesn't say, "It is what it is," and walk away. He says, "I see this clearly, and I will do what is right within my reach." Because real acceptance isn't a shrug. It's standing tall, facing reality, and acting within your limits. It is rational engagement, not emotional surrender. So if you find yourself saying, "It is what it is," too often pause. Ask yourself, am I accepting this or am I giving up? If it's something you truly can't change, let it go. But if it's something you still can influence, even in a small way, don't let exhaustion disguise itself as enlightenment. Remember, true peace doesn't come from ending the fight. It comes from knowing what you're fighting for. And the Stoic man, even when silent before the world, has never stopped standing up inside. 6. It's not my fault. When a man gives away his own power, there is a simple truth few dare to face. The faster you say, "It's not my fault," the more likely you are to lose all ability to change the situation. That phrase, short, familiar, seemingly a harmless defense, is in fact an invisible blade that severs your final link to inner control. Every time you say it, you're not just rejecting responsibility. You're handing over your destiny to others, to circumstances, to fate. And the painful part is, you may think you're protecting yourself from blame, when in truth, you're giving up your chance to grow, to act, to change. I once knew a man named Brent. For years in retail, he believed the reason he couldn't move up was because his boss didn't like him, his co-workers played dirty, the environment was toxic. He would tell anyone who'd listen, "I do good work, but they favor someone else." I'm not denying that injustice exists, but when asked if he ever sought feedback, learned new skills, or volunteered for greater responsibility, his answer was always, "They never gave me the chance." Brent didn't realize that in trying to avoid the sting of failure, he had surrendered his power to act to everyone but himself. Epictetus once said, "It's not events that disturb us, but how we interpret them." That line cuts through every excuse, because whatever has happened, a rejection, an insult, a loss, how you choose to perceive and respond to it ultimately shapes who you become. And the man who says, "It's not my fault," too often will, over time, become a background character in his own story. Stoic philosophy does not deny circumstances. It simply refuses to let them dictate our response. When you blame the economy, other people, or the past, you may be partially right, but you will never move forward if the end of every problem lies outside of you. In contrast, the Stoic man asks the hard question, "In this situation, What do I still control? That is where real strength begins. You don't need to carry all the blame to be responsible. But you do need the courage not to dodge it too quickly, because sometimes a very small part of the fault is yours. But 100% of the change can begin with you. And if you miss that moment, the moment when you could say, I don't control everything, but I will own my part, then you've also missed the chance to reclaim ownership of your life. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So the next time something goes wrong, instead of asking, whose fault is it? Ask, how can I act from here? The answer may not be comfortable, but it will always move you forward instead of drowning you in the murky waters of blame and helplessness. Because the man who blames may receive sympathy, but the man who takes responsibility earns trust. And in this world, that may be the quietest form of power everyone longs for, but only the truly grounded dare to claim. I used to be the man behind all 6 of those phrases. Not because I was foolish, but because I didn't realize I was slowly shrinking my world, word by word, with every seemingly harmless excuse. I once said, I've always been this way, to avoid change, avoided emotion out of fear of appearing weak, blamed others, expected things, refused to help, gave up as if the world owed me an explanation. But then I realized, no one is coming to save me, and no one has to. I have to be the one to free myself from all of it, because strength isn't found in what you avoid, it's found in what you have the courage to face, to name clearly, and to walk through with reasoned silence and action that carries weight. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. And remember, the strongest man is not the one who never stumbles, but the one who dares to look himself in the eye in silence and still chooses to rise day after day. See you in the next video.